Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another crazy deep dive into the unknown on Relative Perspective, Paranormal Confessions. As always, I'm your host, Stephen, and tonight we're going way back to one of the creepiest and oldest stories that humanity has ever told. Now, this story has everything, guys. It's got fallen angels, giants, ancient bloodlines, forbidden knowledge, and military cover-ups. It crosses lines between religion, mythology, UFO lore, and even real-world sightings that just don't make any sense. Because if you think about it, guys, maybe we're not as alone as you might think. And if this kind of deep dive into the weird and unexplainable already has you on edge, I want you to go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you're new, and go ahead and drop a comment down below. I'm not just here to tell stories, guys. I'm here to try to build a community of people who aren't afraid to ask the tough questions, who know that there's something off with the official story that we're being fed today. Now, this isn't just for spooky season, guys. It's for the truth seekers, the curious, and the brave. So I want you to go ahead and buckle up, because we're about to dive headfirst into the story of the Watchers and the Nephilim and the ancient knowledge that might have cursed humanity from the very beginning. Let's go ahead and get into it. So where does this whole thing start? Well, believe it or not, it starts with one of the most debated verses in the entire Bible. We have Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and here's what it says. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Now, most churches, they'll just skip right past that. They'll either say, oh, it's just poetic or symbolic language. But we have ancient texts, especially in the Book of Enoch, that don't treat it like poetry. They actually treat it like a cosmic crime scene. Now, the sons of God weren't just some group of holy people. These were actually angels, or watchers as they were called. And the only job that God gave them was to watch over us and to never interfere with us. But guess what? They didn't follow those orders at all. According to Enoch, 200 of them descended to earth and landed on Mount Hermon. Now, this place is a real mountain, and it still looms over the borders of Israel and Lebanon today. And that is where they made a pact, a full blood oath. They wanted to take human women as wives. And guess what? They weren't just interested in love. They also brought with them forbidden knowledge, the kind of stuff that humanity was not supposed to know. Now, their leader was a powerful angel by the name of Semjaza. Now, when they made this pact with each other, Semjaza was actually scared that all these other angels were going to bail, so he made them all swear to come down with him to earth together. It was kind of like he was scared, I guess. Now, among all these angels, there was one, and I'm sure you've heard this name. His name was Azazel. Azazel's name, it pops up later on in religious texts, and he's usually tied to chaos, corruption, and dark magic. Now, Azazel, he didn't waste time. He taught humans how to make weapons, manipulate beauty, summon spirits, and twist nature itself. Now, with this dude doing this, it was like handing a flamethrower to a toddler. And as a result of everything they did, they took the wives, they gave humans all this knowledge. After that came the Nephilim. This is the bad part. These weren't just tall dudes. These things were monsters. They were giants in size and in cruelty. They devoured all the food, the animals, and when all that was up, they started devouring people. And whenever they got tired of doing that, they turned on themselves. These creatures corrupted everything. Animals mutated. The weather went haywire, kind of like it's been going today. It's kind of weird, right? The earth was covered in blood, and the earth cried out. And finally, heaven had enough, and they answered. Now, God sent the toughest of his crew, I guess you could call them. He sent Michael. They're the archangels. He sent Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and Gabriel. And God gave them some brutal orders. He told them to chain the watchers underground, wipe out all the Nephilim, and basically clean the slate, wipe the slate clean. Now, these guys did their job, because Enoch said that they bound the watchers deep underground in a prison that they called Dudeo. Now, this place was crazy. It was a desert pit of fire and stone. And the Nephilim, supposedly they were wiped out in the flood. But here's the twist. Enoch adds this little line, almost like a footnote. But it's not just a footnote. It changes everything. Here it is. And there were Nephilim on the earth, and also afterward. Now, I don't know what you think whenever you hear that line, but here's what I think. I think what Enoch is trying to say is that some of these things actually survived. I don't know if they personally survived, if their spirit survived, or they hid in bloodlines, or just secret whispers. Because in certain remote places around the world, people actually still talk about these things. They still see them. They have towering figures, glowing eyes, and human strength, and a cold, cold presence. Not human and not angel, but something in between. And there's others that claim that they're still here, but they're hiding in plain sight. They're watching, they're waiting, and when the stars align, they're going to come back. All right, guys, I can almost hear what you're thinking out there. You're probably thinking, okay, that's a cool story, but that's just one religion. But here's the thing. The idea of giants born from unions with either sky beings or gods shows up almost everywhere in almost every other religion. Now, for example, take ancient Sumer. Now, these guys talked about the Anunnaki. I'm sure y'all heard of them. These were beings from the heavens that came down and tampered with early humans. Now, in some accounts, they claimed that they had tampered with us and they created hybrid beings, basically half them and half human. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Then there's Norse mythology. I'm sure if anybody's ever seen the Thor movies on the Marvel universe, you'll know what I'm talking about here. The Jotun or the frost giants. These were primordial beings. Now, these things were older than the gods themselves, representing chaos, destruction, and nature that was out of control. Now, these things weren't just enemies. They were forces of cosmic imbalance. And here's another example. You had the Greeks with the Titans. Now, these creatures were born of earth and sky, and they were so powerful that even the gods above them were afraid of them. Now, eventually, their offspring, which were called the Olympians, they overthrew the Titans and locked them away in a place called Tartarus. Now, this prison was so deep and underground and so scary that the gods barely even discussed it. They were so scared of it, they didn't even talk about it. Now, these examples aren't just set in the old world either. You had Native American tribes, especially the Paiute in Nevada, and they talked about creatures called the Sitka. These were red-haired cannibalistic giants that lived in caves. Now, the Paiute decided to take things in their own hands. They trapped these things inside the cave and they set it on fire and basically wiped them out. And that cave, it's called Lovelock Cave. It's real and it's been excavated. And guess what was reportedly found? They found huge oversized sandals that was almost double the size of any human foot. Large bones and huge skulls with, you got it, red hair. Now, those are just a few of the examples. I'm not going to go through all of them. But you had places like Polynesia, Mesoamerica, Africa, and Eastern Europe where this pattern repeats itself over and over and over again. You had sky beings, forbidden unions, giants being born, and divine judgment that follows. Like I said before, it's like no matter where you look, humanity is remembering the same nightmare over and over again. Now, sure, you're going to have the skeptics out there that say that this is just a metaphor for powerful kings or people with huge egos. And who knows, maybe it is. Maybe it is a metaphor. But there's a flip side to that. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's trauma. Maybe we're all remembering something that really actually happened. A time when our world was invaded by something unnatural that didn't belong here. And we barely survived the whole thing. And that question just doesn't go away. If giants really walked the earth, then where did they go? Were they all wiped out by the flood, or did some go underground? Or is it possible, like some people think, that they mixed their bloodlines with the royal family or people that are in power? Did they hide? And if they did, are these things still out there watching and waiting for their time? So now, we've talked about all these ancient stories. We had giants and fallen angels and ancient bloodlines. But let's go ahead and fast forward to something way more recent and way closer to home. Because starting in the late 1800s, something weird started popping up all over the United States, especially in the Midwest. You had newspaper articles, dig site reports, and eyewitness accounts, and they all pointed to the same thing: giant skeletons. Now, this wasn't rumors, it wasn't folklore. I'm talking about documented discoveries here. Let me give you an example of just a couple of the creepier ones that I found. In 1877 in Ohio, workers reportedly uncovered a large skeleton almost 10 feet long. Now, this thing was buried with what looked like copper armor. Now, this wasn't ceremonial junk. This was actual gear. It looked like it was made to be worn in battle. To me, this was a creepy one. But our next one in 1912, it's a lot worse. Like I said, it was in 1912 in Wisconsin. A team uncovers 18 giant skeletons in this huge mound. Now, listen to this. Some actually had double rows of teeth in their mouth. Not all of them had that, but the other ones had like elongated skulls, like something that you would expect to find like in Peru or Egypt, somewhere over there. Not in dairy country. Now, here's where things get really weird, because and like I said, these are only two. There was so much more, but in case after case, all these bones vanished, and the pattern is eerily similar. But we have one more log to throw on the fire in this story, and that's the Smithsonian, because here's how it usually went. The discovery was made, locals were excited or freaked out, then the Smithsonian was called in, and after they got involved, it was radio silence. There was nothing. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a viral article a few years back that went all over the internet that basically made the claim that the Smithsonian had claimed that they had destroyed over 1,000 giant skeletons back in the early 1900s. That story turned out to be a hoax, and of course it came from a satire site, and that really pisses me off because that makes it hard for people like you and me to hash out the truth, you know? But like I said, it was a hoax. But here's the part that no one likes to talk about. Why do you think so many people actually believe that story? Because deep down, I'm sure you're like me, a lot of us feel like that there's something being hidden from us, especially when it comes to things that don't fit the accepted narrative. Now, let's be real. We know for a fact that during the 19th and the 20th century, there were thousands of Native American burial sites that were dug up, looted, studied without any consent. And after they were studied, the artifacts either vanished, they ended up in some private collector's collection, some of the bones were boxed up and cataloged, and some of them weren't. So is it really that hard to believe that if something truly anomalous was found, like a skeleton that didn't match human proportions, let's say, that it might have been quietly taken away or destroyed or something like that? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If even one of those skeletons or bones were real, then everything that we've been told about human history changes. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the flood, the giants who were supposed to have been wiped out, suddenly they're not myth anymore. They're part of our real physical past. And maybe someone somewhere decided that the world just wasn't ready to know that yet. So instead of actually doing the right thing and rewriting the textbooks and telling everybody the truth, they buried it right along with those bones. So up to this point, we've been talking about ancient accounts, old legends, and lost bones. But now we're going to jump forward again. Not hundreds of years, but just a couple of decades. Because one of the most disturbing and most hotly debated encounters with a so-called Nephilim, it didn't happen in some forgotten cave or some dusty old temple. It actually happened in 2002 during the war in Afghanistan. And if the story is true, it's one of the most terrifying military encounters of modern history. Here's how it goes. A U.S. Army Special Forces unit was operating in the mountains near Kandahar in Afghanistan. Now, this place was an area full of rugged cliffs, deep caves, and a long bloody history. Now, one day, like I said, back in 2002, a recon team goes dark. There was no radio call, no GPS, no distress call. They were just gone. So the military dispatches a rescue team to go find this other team and find out exactly what happened. And what these guys find is a nightmare. They find scattered gear, weapons that look like they'd been broken in half. They found blood everywhere, but no bodies were there to be found. And as they were continuing to look around to try to find these guys, that's when they heard it. They started hearing heavy footsteps coming from way off in the distance. And out from the rocks behind this cliff steps out a creature that shouldn't exist. Now, some of these guys had described this thing as being at least 12 feet tall. That's almost double me. I'm like 6'7". Now, 12 feet tall, that's crazy. That's like 2 feet over a freaking basketball rim. That's huge. They said it looked humanoid, but it was definitely not human. This thing had red hair, leathery skin, and it had 6 fingers on each hand. Now, when they saw this thing's eyes, they said it was glowing, animalistic, and predatory. Now, this thing isn't just standing there. It's actually carrying a huge weapon. They said it looked like a massive spear, and they said it looked ancient, but it didn't look primitive. It actually looked like it was engineered. As this thing gets closer and sees these guys, then it starts to charge. The soldiers draw their weapon, and they open fire on this thing. But this monster doesn't stop. It's still carrying the spear, and it keeps coming. It's like the bullets just basically bounce off of him. Now, some reports have claimed that it takes almost 30 seconds of sustained gunfire for this monster to drop. Now, understandably, when it's over, the whole team was in shock. They all gather up, they wrap the body in like this cargo net, and then the radio operator, he calls in the Chinook helicopter, and they hook this thing up and they airlift it out of there. According to some of their stories, this creature weighed over 1,100 pounds. But here's what's the unbelievable part. This is what happens next. Back at the base, the entire team was separated, debriefed, and forced to sign what they call an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement. And they were told in no uncertain terms that this never happened. The creature, it doesn't exist. And that missing recon team that they went to look for, they listed them as killed in action with no other further details released. There was no press coverage, no photos, just silence. But the story, it didn't stay buried. Now, over the years, this story actually leaked, first in whispers, then in interviews. One source known only as Dan, he didn't want to give his real name, he actually went public. And another guy told his story anonymously, and you can understand why. He told his story to an investigative filmmaker by the name of L.A. Marzulli. And every time that this story surfaces by some whistleblower, all the details, they stay eerily consistent. They say this thing had red hair, glowing eyes, a giant frame, it had 6 fingers, a primitive spear, and it lived in an underground cave. Now, all these stories are starting to sound familiar, right? Because all these details seem to match all the ancient accounts that we discussed before. You had the Book of Enoch, the tribal elders, and even all those skulls and bones found in those forgotten mounds. Now, of course, the skeptics say that this is just an urban legend. It's a ghost story wrapped up in military camo. But here's the thing. The veterans that served in Afghanistan claim that the gear, the protocol, the terrain, the story that all those guys told, it sounded completely legit. They said it was too detailed to be fantasy. And let's be honest, in a place like Afghanistan, where ancient ruins dot the landscape, and most of the terrain over there has never been mapped, who's to say what's hiding in those mountains? And I'm sure y'all have heard the same thing about, like Bigfoot up in Oregon. I mean, there's places over there that humans have never seen, and I'm sure it's the same way in Afghanistan. And even if one part of this story is true, then maybe we're not dealing with a single rogue creature. Maybe this wasn't just a one-time anomaly. Maybe this was the only one that got caught. A lot of people believe that these things weren't destroyed by the flood, that they were driven underground into the deep places of the earth where we're just too afraid to dig. Others claim that their bloodline survived by mixing it with human families, slowly blending in, but always keeping the power, the knowledge, and the secrets. And this is where things start to get really, really weird. Some believe that these beings are trying to make a comeback, not just randomly, but by design. Rumors of genetic experiments in hidden labs. You had cloning projects, hybrid breeding programs, and here's the wildest theory of all, that the Nephilim aren't being reborn through science. They're actually being summoned through portals. Yep, you've got it right, interdimensional gates. I'm sure you've heard of the CERN project before, right? Now, on the surface, I know it sounds a lot like sci-fi, but when you look across time and culture, these patterns keep showing up over and over. You got giants, hidden knowledge, underground civilizations, and portals between worlds. So here's the question. What if these stories aren't just the leftovers from old myths? What if they're early warnings? What if something ancient is trying to come back? Now, I know you probably think I'm crazy, but this thing actually goes a lot deeper. Because the Watchers, if they were real, they didn't just leave behind offspring. They left behind knowledge. But this isn't the kind of knowledge that helped humanity. This knowledge almost destroyed it. Now, like I said before, according to the Book of Enoch, these fallen angels, especially the one called Azazel, he shared forbidden information with humans, stuff that we were not supposed to know. Things like weapons of war, witchcrafts, enchantments, and spells, astrology, not to study the stars, but to manipulate fate. He also showed us poison making, seduction, and sorcery, and maybe the most chilling secret of all, he tried to teach us the secrets of heaven. And if that sounds far-fetched, I want you to just wait, because that same kind of dark knowledge, it shows up again in a totally different realm. You got modern UFO encounters. Now I'm talking about people who've been abducted. You got contactees and experiencers, and many of them report shockingly similar encounters. First, you had beings with glowing eyes who communicate telepathically. They gave them visions of global disasters like hurricanes and global war, earthquakes, things like that. Warnings about DNA manipulation, hybrid breeding, and the corruption of humanity. And I'm sure that you've heard more than once that they talked about references to a lost ancient past that we're not supposed to remember. Now you got other people that are showed images of other worlds. Now they're shown entire galactic histories and wars between other celestial races. And you got others that come back and they talk about how that these beings gave them some type of a mission, that they're actually a part of a cosmic bloodline and that they're chosen. Now, I know that sounds crazy until you realize that some of what they say lines up word for word with ancient texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of the Giants, and even part of the Bible itself. And then there's another strange little detail. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those ancient sacred documents pulled from those caves in Qumran. They mention something too. They mention beings called the Watchers in the Sky. So here's the question. What if these aliens aren't aliens at all? What if these aliens are actually the Watchers, but they're showing up in a different disguise? Because I want you to think about it. Thousands of years ago, they came down to earth as gods. They were actually described as beings of light and of terrifying beauty and power. And then they became legends, demons, and angels cast down from heaven. Now, just what if today they came as aliens? Tall, glowing, and silent. And they're always obsessed with our blood, our genetics, and our future. Now, you have to ask yourself, what if this is not a new phenomenon at all? What if this is the same ancient force? They're just swapping out masks. And through it all through time, they've never stopped influencing us. They actually just changed tactics. Okay, so let's bring it all together. We started with a few verses in Genesis. Then we had angels breaking the rules. Then we had giants walking the earth and a flood sent to wipe it all clean. But the majority of the ancient texts, they don't say that the story is over. They say it kept going. Remember that line? There were Nephilim on the earth and also afterward. So, what if they survived? What if their offspring still walk among us today? What if all of this, giants, demons, UFOs, ancient civilizations, hybrid bloodlines, what if it's all connected? Because when you line it up, you have ancient myths, tribal legends, biblical stories, modern sightings, lost bones, military encounters, and the deep, deep, eerie knowledge that keeps leaking through. In my opinion, that's just way too much to ignore. To me, this doesn't feel just like random folklore. It almost feels like hidden history, one that we were never supposed to remember. But here we are together, digging. And if even one part of this story is true, then maybe the Nephilim weren't just a glitch in the story. Maybe they were the story. And maybe they still are. Okay, before we finish, I got a really weird story to tell you guys. I was outside on my porch writing this script, and look, I know this is going to sound strange. I'm sorry, I apologize, but I have to say this. I have to tell you what happened. It was around, I guess, 6, maybe 7 o'clock. It was still daylight outside, and like I said, I was writing the script, and something really weird, really, really weird happens. I've never seen this before. I actually called my sister and my mom, and I told them exactly what had happened because it freaked me out so much. Now, like I said, I was sitting on my porch in the corner right there on my porch, and I had my phone down, or my head down on my phone, and I was writing out the script. And there was a certain part that I was writing, and I'll explain to you in just a second where I was. But like I was looking at my phone, and all of a sudden I saw this bright flash, like almost like a ball of lightning, right? But it was little bitty. It was about the size of a tennis ball. It was about 5 feet away, and it flashed for like a split second, and it made like a static pop sound. Okay, and then I looked over to it, and all of a sudden, a split second later, just enough time for me to look over, right above my head, it happened again. Pop, another. It was like a little ball of light. At first thing I thought, well, this must be one of those lightning bugs. But this, I mean, usually when you see lightning bugs, they're like a yellowish. The tail glows like yellow, and it's little bitty. This thing was, like I said, about the size of either a golf ball or a tennis ball, and it was bright white. Okay, and I called my sister, and she's big into this kind of stuff. She knows all about the Nephilim and the Watchers, and these kind of stories. And she actually told me that she thinks it might be that I was maybe hitting on something that I wasn't supposed to be hitting on. Like she asked me, she said, well, what part of the story were you talking about? Or what part of the script were you writing? And it was kind of close to the beginning where I was talking about, what if the Nephilim never were destroyed? What if they're still here, like in secret bloodlines, or, basically hiding from us until they're ready to show their face. And I swear to you guys, that's when this happened. It really, I mean, I'm sorry to, if any of you guys have ever seen anything like that, or, just let me know I'm not crazy, please. Go ahead and put down in the comments, what you might think this is, because it really, like I said, I've never seen anything like that before. Now, I've seen things. Remember, I've told you my ghost stories, and I'm not scared of it by any means, because like my mom even told me, she said, well, maybe that means you shouldn't be telling this story. And I said, no, I'm not gonna shy away from that. I'm not gonna let a couple of little balls of light try to scare me from telling a story. Maybe they didn't want to get it out there. Maybe they didn't want me to talk about this stuff. But like I said, I'm not gonna let that stop me. So I've got Jesus on my side. I'm a Christian. I'm good to go. I prayed about it when I was sick. But anyways, thank you for listening to my story. Like I said, go ahead and put down in the comments what you think it was, okay? I want to thank you for riding along on this deep, dark dive into ancient history. You've been listening to Relative Perspective Paranormal Confessions. As always, I'm your host, Stephen. And if tonight's episode made you question reality just a little bit, if it gave you goosebumps and made you wonder what's really lurking out there in those mountains and deserts, I want you to go ahead and do me a favor. I want you to smash down on that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new, and share this with all of your friends that like these creepy type stories. And hey, if you have a story yourself, or a paranormal confession, or anything crazy like I just told you earlier, I want you to go ahead and email it to me, or you can drop it down in the comments, like I said before, or you can email it to me at relativeperspective76@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your story, and who knows, maybe one day in the near future, you might hear your story on this show. My goal isn't just to tell stories. I don't just want to build a podcast here. I want to build a community of truth seekers, of people who aren't scared to dig deeper into what people claim to be the truth. And I want you to be part of that team. So until next time, stay curious, stay safe. And if you ever find yourself at the mouth of a cave and you see something ancient standing there in the dark, how about not going in? Because sometimes what's watching you, it ain't human. Okay, guys, thanks again for watching. God bless you. We love you. And good night. We did it again without a teleprompter. God, it seemed like it got harder today. But anyway, thank you. Love you. Bye.